Quick, answer this question. Would you rather read the book or see the movie? If you'd rather see the movie, you're not alone. In fact, most people would probably agree with you. So, why is that? The plain and simple fact is that watching a movie is probably the easier task. You get to hear how the actors sound when they talk to each other, you can see their facial expressions and body language, and movies add background sounds and music that can help set the scene and elicit emotion. If you agree with that, then you already understand why this week's reading strategy, inferring, is so important to help you have the same reaction to a printed text. What is inferring? To infer means to read between the lines to fill in gaps and draw conclusions. When we infer, we make an assumption about what a writer is not saying in the text. Think of it as looking at the clues the author does include as a way to fill in the gaps or read between the lines. However, we shouldn't talk about inferring without talking about predicting, which you should remember means to use the text, title, and illustrations to determine what you think will happen. Predicting and inferring are two very different strategies, but both strategies require that readers make a statement about details that are not included in the text. As a result, it is easy for readers to mistakenly make a prediction when they attempt to make an inference. To make sure we understand the difference, think of inferring as the opposite of predicting. When you predict, you look at clues to make a guess about what will happen in the future. When you infer, you look at clues to draw a conclusion about the past, or what you've already read. Predicting looks forward. Inferring looks backward. Why is inferring important? Most readers make inferences when reading without even realizing it, because inferring helps us better understand what we read. Often, writers do not always tell us every detail or emotion they mean to include in the text. In fact, if they did tell us every detail, their writing probably wouldn't be something anyone would want to read. If we think back to the opening example, a movie uses the actor's body language and tone of voice, as well as music, to help the viewer fill in these points. In writing, authors try to use descriptive language to imply these details so that the reader can infer what the author means. For example, instead of an author writing, "She was happy," the author may write, "She smiled." In that case, the author expects that the reader will understand that people who smile are usually happy, and therefore the character was probably happy. The reader uses the details the author provided to read between the lines and make an inference. In fact, we could use inferences to support an interpretation of a text, so it's important that we understand the difference between when we're using a textual fact versus when we're using an inference to support the interpretation. If you were arguing that the character was happy and needed evidence to support it, you could point to the line where the author wrote, "She smiled," and explain that the reader can infer the character was happy. Inferring helps us understand the text on the surface and on a deeper level. Sometimes it's as simple as recognizing that a character was happy. But sometimes inferring is important in understanding the motivations behind someone's actions or events taking place. Often, inferring is important in answering or explaining why something happened. How do we make quality inferences? As mentioned, authors cannot include all the information the reader needs. So that means readers should make inferences every time we read for both fiction texts, like novels and short stories, and nonfiction texts, like textbooks and news articles. When making an inference, there are 3 phrases we want to avoid. Do not say, "I can infer blank will happen, would happen, or is going to happen." If something will happen, would happen, or is going to happen, then that means you're looking at the future, and that makes your statement a prediction. So be sure to avoid using the words will, would, or is going to when you're making an inference. Instead, to make an inference, we need to look backward at what we already read and think about what the text did not say. It can help us remember what to do if we use the following sentence starter. It didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer because. Using the sentence starter, it didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer because will help us remember we need to look back at evidence from what we already read in order to make a quality inference. Lastly, remember that the reader is always the one who infers. Because infer means to read between the lines, the text can't infer something to the reader. The text can't read between the lines to the reader. If we want to talk about the clues the text gives us, we should say that the text implies, suggests, or hints at something. Imply means to suggest or hint at. So the sender, the author of the text, implies something. Then, the receiver, the reader or audience, infers something. The text implies or suggests, the reader infers. Understanding this difference will help us use these words correctly when we talk about inferences. What are some examples? Now that we have a good idea of what inferring is, why it's important, and how to use it, let's take a look at some examples. Read the following passage and then think about what we can infer. Mom poked her head into the kitchen. Maria, your aunt just called. Your cousin Anna is going to be visiting next week. Can't wait, I said. I grabbed my phone and checked the weather app to see which day would be best to take Anna to Great America. What can the reader infer from this passage? Maria says she can't wait until her cousin Anna arrives and then starts thinking about some fun ways to spend their time. It doesn't say it in the text, but when we put these details together, we can infer that Maria is genuinely excited about the visit and looking forward to spending time with her cousin. But what happens if some of these details were different? Let's look at the same scene again with one change. Mom poked her head into the kitchen. Maria, your aunt just called. Your cousin Anna is going to be visiting next week. Can't wait, I said as I rolled my eyes. In this scene, instead of making plans to go to Great America, Maria rolls her eyes. What can the reader infer from this passage? It doesn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer that Maria is not looking forward to the visit from her cousin. It is likely she was being sarcastic when she said she couldn't wait. In fact, because she rolled her eyes, she seems somewhat annoyed by the news. These two passages were very similar, but the author had two very different intentions. Because the author implied how Maria felt about the visit, rather than stating it outright, it was up to the reader to put the details together to infer what Maria's response really meant. Let's try again. Read the following passage from a health textbook and think about what can be inferred from the details provided. Hormones cause many physical changes in teenagers during the adolescent years, but they can also impact teens in ways that affect decision-making, stress, self-esteem, and even sleep patterns. Though all teens experience these changes to some degree, when they happen and the effect they have on an individual will be different from person to person. What can you infer about the effects of hormones on teens from this passage? The text implies a lot about the role hormones play in teen behavior, as well as how that changes from person to person. Some examples might be, it didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer that some teens experience more stress than others during adolescence. It didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer that some teens have better self-esteem than others during adolescence. It didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer that some teens have an easier time dealing with these changes than others. It didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer that some teens may experience changes that affect them mentally or emotionally before they experience physical changes caused by puberty. There are a lot of inferences you could have made here. So if you were able to look back at what the text already stated and read between the lines, you practiced inferring. Recap. Inferring means to read between the lines to fill in gaps and draw conclusions. Inferring means to look backward and draw conclusions about what the text already stated. The reader infers an idea by looking at the details, or clues, to understand what the author implied. Because authors cannot include all the information readers need to fully understand a text, it is important for readers to make inferences every time we read, for both fiction texts, like novels and short stories, and nonfiction texts, like textbooks and articles. Readers can practice making quality inferences by using the sentence starter, "It didn't say it in the text, but the reader can infer," and avoiding terms like will, would, or is going to. That wraps up our flipped lesson on inferring. If you have any questions about this strategy, feel free to watch all or part of the video again or ask your teacher when you return to class. Click the link in the description box below to access a Google form for this lesson.